How to build Flins.
Guys, today I will tell you how to build Flins in terms of artifacts and weapons primarily, so you can prepare your resources for him for when he comes out. I'll also be taking a look at some of the constellation stuff here, because with this in mind, his preferred build—
What do you think about TGS saying Fischl is dead? It's rage bait.
Always sit down and enjoy a proper meal when you get
It's rage bait.
What I like to do is stack my plate up high, then squash it all down.
Cards.
Deep breath.
100% rage bait. Like, I do agree with the underlying sentiment of Fischl being less and less important to team building. But characters like Fischl, just by virtue of the sheer amount of things they can be doing, are just inherently valuable. The fact that Fischl is by far the highest off-field electro app in the game, under the right conditions, means that there's always going to be scenarios where Fischl is very good to use. There's shield breaking, sure, but also future character designs. Alright, you guys need to understand, okay? If there's ever a character that's designed around a reaction that requires a lot of electro app, right? Like, if we ever get an actual, like, EM pyro carry that doesn't build crit, that is supposed to be played with overload, they're going to be unplayable without Fischl. Because Fischl applies so much more electro than anyone else. More than Raiden? It's not even close. Only if you use normal attacks? No. Up to once every 0.8 seconds, if you trigger an electro reaction, you reapply electro. In other words, if you're applying on-field pyro every second, every single one of those is also going to reapply electro. And that's on top of the Oz application. And the C6 application. But also, the character that has the highest app in the game is always going to be relevant, even if they're bad for team building, just because of enemy mechanics potentially forcing you into high application. Right? Especially because that seems like that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to force you into very specific mechanics for enemies. Characters that have a lot of app are just inherently always going to stay relevant because of that.
builds change a bit. First of all,
Child doesn't have as much Hydro application as Syncto, so he's bad. Hydro application is all he has, and he's worse at it than a 4-star that everyone has. And he needs to be on field to do it, whereas Syncto doesn't.
when it comes to leveling him, of course most of his materials come from Nodcry, so you can farm them as of right now. The only thing you can prepare for in advance is the Electro Gemstones, which I'm sure you have plenty of already, and the weekly boss materials you can get from the last weekly boss we got. Artifacts-wise, starting from the stats, Flint is very similar to Ineffa in terms of what he needs. This is because a large portion of his damage, almost all of it to be exact, comes from the Lunar Charge reaction, either from the direct attacks of his kit or the reaction triggers themselves. As you might—
Wait, what are the assumptions here? Not very craftable R5 with Ineffa team buff. Okay. You generally are also going to have Sucrose.
reaction, either from the direct attacks of his kit or the reaction triggers themselves. As you might know, since Lunar Charge is a transformative elemental reaction, it doesn't benefit from damage bonus, and so things like an Electro Damage Goblet won't really benefit him in any way. Elemental Mastery is also pretty bad, because despite the fact that Lunar Charge has some Elemental Mastery scaling, a lot of Flame's lunar damage comes from his Elemental Burst, so it's a direct hit with its own attack scaling multiplier. Attack in general is a pretty valuable stat for him, because he has a
yeah, no, that's not a good explanation for why Flynn doesn't want EM main stats. It's not that EM is bad for him because he's an attack scaler. EM is still good for him, the same way EM is valuable for Vape. It's just that Flynn's gets EM out the fucking wazoo, okay? He gets EM, like... Alright, Flynn's mother drank Elemental Mastery every single day while she was pregnant. Okay? In his early childhood, Flynn's didn't drink milk. He drank Elemental Mastery. Okay? Growing up, alright? Flynn's would not crave sweets. He wouldn't crave fast food. He craved elemental mastery, okay? Like, listen, he gets EM from so many places that at some point you just have too much EM to really want that much more, right? Like, even without EM main stats, Flin's gets as much EM as Kuki has on a full EM build. And let me open my fucking Flin sheets. Alright? If we look at the Flins with Ino C6, which is premium, I think? Yeah. He has 961 EM. Without EM main stats, or EM from the weapon. For comparison, okay, Kuki, 165 from Iron Sting, 187 from 3 main stat, 80 from the 2-piece. She needs 160 EM in the substats to have as much EM as Flin's get just by existing. That's because Flin's gives himself an EM buff, and his best teammates all give him EM. Inefa gives him EM, Sucrose gives him EM, Ino gives him EM. On top of that, the Racist Resonance has direct EM multiplier buffs. So it's not that he doesn't like EM, it's that he's actually gonna have a fucking he's gonna fucking die of an overdose if he gets any more.
Passive that gives him elemental mastery based on 10% of his total attack. Basically, you want to build Flins with attack main stats and create
Analogy ban, please. Sorry.
it for the circlet. Then, in terms of energy, Flint is quite peculiar because he has two elemental burst versions. The first one consumes the entirety of his energy pool to deal a big hit, and the second one consumes just 30 energy, but he can use it multiple times a rotation. The second one is typically the way to go for him, as he will contribute to more total damage. In this sense, there was a change to his kit that many people interpreted as a nerf, but in actuality, it's more like a buff. Basically, the energy cost of his base burst got increased from 70 to 80. While this makes his normal burst more expensive, it also increases his total energy pool from 70 to 80, and so that facilitates the energy management for his preferred playstyle, where he uses several mini bursts. At Constellation 0, the total amount of mini bursts he can use is of 2 a rotation, because they can only be enabled by his special elemental skill that has a 6 seconds cooldown. Since his uptime is of just 10 seconds a rotation, that totals to 60 energy spent a rotation for him. And that's not a lot at all for an Electro character. Matter of fact, Flint's energy requirements shouldn't be that high if you have a second Electro character on the team to enable the Electro Resonance. Teammates like Inefa, Fischl, or Yae that produce particles over time, and so will give Flint a lot of direct Electro particles throughout the rotation, are optimal. While
worth noting too, Flin's is just like Inefa. Or sorry, Flin's is just like Verissa, in that his practical ER requirements are lower than his cheated ER requirements. Because most of the time you end up with more HP particle drops than the baseline assumptions, but your particle drops, like your HP threshold drops, particles, they're not consistent, right? So sometimes you get more, most of the time you get more, but sometimes you get less. And in order to not be fucked and in deep, deep trouble and not have the burst in the situations where you get less, you generally assume that you get less, right? But in practice, most of the time you get a bit more. Right? Most of the time you swap to your character, they already have their burst available. You don't need that last particle. You're not exactly at the ER requirements. Right? Because, like, very, very straightforward explanation, okay? Let's say you're playing, let's say you're playing a Verissa team, right? With Verissa, Yonsan, Chevreuse, Shanley, right? So, actually no, because these particle drops are consistent. Let's do Bennett instead, right? So Bennett generally doesn't catch Shuggler's particles, but he generally catches his own, right? And his own particles are 75% chance to get 2 energy and 25% chance to get 3. So on average, it's 2.25. Right? Then there's the Chevy particles, the electroresonance particles, the Eon Sun particles, the Veresa particles, and then the Fav particles. Energy, cost, ER, right? And his burst cost 60. So in this team, he would need 180% energy recharge, 181. But let's say you build 181 energy recharge. And you get the likely result of 2 particles. Now he doesn't have his burst. And so generally, if you want to have comfortable clears, you need to build assuming you get the slightly more unlucky stuff. Because if you get lucky and you get the 3 particles here, sure, you can generate 64 energy, but that 4 additional energy just disappears. It goes into a burst that's already full. It's not kept for the future. And if you're fighting an enemy that drops more HP particles, right, same thing happens. You just waste those particles. But on characters that have a higher burst container than the actual energy they need to use their burst, if you get a lucky result, or if you get an enemy that drops more HP particles, that additional energy doesn't get wasted. It doesn't disappear into the void. You do get the energy. And because of that, characters like Veresa and Flin's do not actually need ER requirements in practice as high as you would calculate in sheets. That's why, in my eyes, as long as you have Electro Resonance, as long as you have a second Electro character, Flin's is a character that doesn't need ER at all. Pretty much no matter which one. Even on the Sarah team, I wouldn't really build ER on him. ER is a stat that is nice to have, but it's like more on the level of flat attack than it is on the level of attack percent. You know? What does this thing give energy? I don't fucking know, dude. I guess it's because his ER requirements are a little bit higher at C1. Because his energy cost per rotation instead of 60 is 69. Right? Because he refunds 21 energy. But he uses 30 more, so it's plus 9. And at that point, then it's not 150, it's like 170, 180. And that is actually high enough that you're not really going to get it from the leftover stuff.
While shakier particle generators like Janssen or Sarah especially will cause more issues. Still, since his max energy is of 80, so 20 more than he can spend every rotation, this will allow him to store the overflowing energy pretty well throughout the run, and so he will realistically need less energy than what the data states. Moving on, artifact sets wise, he has a new signature set, that of course is his best. This set will give him different effects depending on how many Nodcry characters you have on the team. If you have 2, he will get 30% crit rate, while if you have 1, he will get half of that, so 15%. Typically, the set stays a really good option regardless, but it's...
Are Sarah Flin's comps sus in practice? They're not that bad, honestly. As long as you have C6, right? Because, like, Flin's doesn't have a good second Electro slot other than Inefa. So, Whether you end up using Sarah or Auron, it's pretty similar.
It's only an unquestionably best in slot if you have a second not-cry character on the team, so one of Aino, Inefa, and Lauma. There is really no situation where you'd rather not have a second not-cry.
Sarah is such a fake teammate. I don't think she's that fake. I think for people that don't have Inefa, she's one of the options for sure. The highest 2-cost team I found for Flin's out of what I've done so far does use Sarah. Like, Flin C1 plus Sarah C6 is better than Flin C0 plus Inefa. Pretty noticeably so, too.
Character on the team, and Aino was from
But yeah, you don't have sustain, so you're kind of cooked in practice, but still.
Is a free option, so you should farm this set, no question asked. Also because, remember, it doesn't benefit much from damage bonus, so even with him being a burst-reliant character, something like the Emblem of Severed Fate does nothing for him. Moving to the weapons now, he has a very strong signature option. It will give him a lot of crit, some lunar charge damage bonus, and also an energy refund once a rotation, which comes in handy for a character like him. Alternatively, he has a very fitting free-to-play option, the craftable not-cry polyarm that gives him a lot of attack and lunar charge damage bonus. Still, the difference between the two weapons is what you would typically expect the difference between a free option and the signature one to be these days, so of around 30%. This difference tends to become higher when his energy requirements are big on a team, because the energy refund effects that come with the signature becomes more valuable. For the rest, there are a lot of polyarms that fit pretty well. Options like Homa, Vortex Vanquisher, and the Scarlet Sands give a lot of raw stats, mainly in the form of attack and crit, and it benefits from those a lot. The same goes for the Battle Pass weapons, so if you have either Deathmatch or Fjords at Refinement 5, they will be very decent replacements of his signature weapon. Before jumping to his constellations now, I want to say something about how you should build his teammates. When you have two not-cry characters on the team, you activate a resonance that will give the team a lunar reaction damage bonus depending on the stats of the characters on the team that are not from not-cry. This caps at 48%. When looking at Flin's teams, his allies typically involve a combination of Hydro and Anemo or secondarily of Hydro and Geo. Assuming you use Hydro and Anemo, with an evenly split contribution, your Anemo character will need to have 800 Elemental Mastery and your Hydro character will need to have 30,000 HP to maximize the special effect. A popular ally for Flins in the Anemo element is Sucrose, because Sucrose can provide a lot of raw stats buffs, like Elemental Mastery through some of her passives, and attack through weapons like the Trilling Tails. The issue, however, is that when she's using Trilling Tails specifically, it's very hard for her to reach the 800 Elemental Mastery threshold, because she has no Elemental Mastery Ascension stat. As a result, you might need to rely on your Hydro character more to reach the 48% buff, so maybe a character like Yelan with an HP goblet instead of a Hydro one, or Furina. Alternatively, if you have Wandering Evenstar, so a weapon that can provide nice attack buffs for the team while also giving Sucrose the Elemental Mastery she needs, that would be a nice solution.
I mean, I don't know. Liar is like less than 1% difference with DGDS. So you can also just go on Liar.
Lastly, just one thing about his constellations. The Constellation 1 lowers his special skill cooldown from 6 to 4. As a reminder, this special skill enables his mini burst, and with this change he will be able to use 3 bursts a rotation for 90 total energy spent. To alleviate this expense, the Constellation will give him some energy refunds when party members trigger a lunar charge reaction with a cooldown of 5 seconds and a half. On average, he will get 3 to 4 a rotation with this, so 21 or 28 energy. Neither case completely makes up for the extra 30 energy spent for his additional burst, however, and so he will need to build some additional energy recharge. This is when having his signature weapon comes in handy because of the extra energy refunds. In fact, 3 signature signature and the constellation one, it will be able to recover 30-40 energy a rotation, and that's quite massive. If you have the signature, even a constellation one, it will barely need any energy to function. Lastly, in case you have some extra pull to spend, but you're in doubt between his signature and the constellation one, this is how they compare. They're pretty similar, with the constellation one being a little better in terms of damage increase, although by itself the C1 brings additional build caveats, so the one I just talked about with the energy requirements. His signature, on the other hand, has a varying value depending on how much energy you need, but as a whole brings more quality of life.
The gap should be bigger. I guess he's valuing the ER refunds a lot, but I feel like
for little damage difference, so that's something you might appreciate. Anyway, overall, Flin is a pretty easy character to build, like him preferring an attack goblet to a damage bonus one in particular is really nice, because they're easier to get, and so he would probably be able to accumulate more crit stats on average compared to other characters. The only painful restriction here is the requirement for a second Nodcry character on the team, because without that you can get resonance, the artifact sets don't work, and so everything crumbles. And with this, I'm done for today.